Okay, I'm here with Jose Figueroa. He's from British Columbia, and now you've been traveling across the country raising awareness about your deportation order. Now, you originally come from El Salvador, but have lived in Canada for the last 14 years, is it?
Yes, that's right.
Now, can you explain to me about the tour, the We Are Jose tour, and the awareness you're raising about this issue?
We started this tour because we had learned something. The Minister of Public Safety is going to... Actually, I gotta get back, organize a little bit of my thoughts.
No, I understand. How did this all begin?
I wasn't aware of any allegations or problems that was within my immigration process. The only thing that it was very slow, and it had taken about more than 13 years, and in the end, what I find is that there's this big issue that the Canadian government has concerning a democratically elected government. So anyways, just to say a few words, this tour we have been talking to people, trying to raise awareness about a situation with the immigration law itself. It has a section that is affecting the rights of many people. So just leave that by now, and then get back to what has been going on this situation. To make the story a little bit short, is whenever we find people on the street, on the bus stop, or at the library, we just try to engage in a conversation. My son has been carrying a We Are Jose flag, and he knows that what was the objective of that We Are Jose flag? To call people attention. People come and ask us, oh, what is that flag about? Then we just tell them this very concise story. My son and I have been hitchhiking from Langley, BC. And the reason why we are doing that is because of an immigration problem that we have. My wife and I have been living here in Canada for almost 14 years. We have 3 Canadian-born children. My son, Jose Ivan, he was diagnosed with autism in 2002, and immigration just issued a deportation order against me last year. People ask us, this is amazing, so long, and why are they doing that? And well, if Nelson Mandela was brought into Canada and CBSA officers bring him into an admissibility hearing like the one they brought me in, Nelson Mandela will be certainly found inadmissible into Canada and deported from Canada.
Right. So that's interesting because he's visited Canada, I think, a few times, and because of his activism as a youth with the ANC, and you also worked with the FMLN. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
What this situation does is that it shows that within the immigration law, there's something wrong. Because if a section of the immigration law can find somebody like Nelson Mandela inadmissible, then he can't find anybody inadmissible. As a matter of fact, there are many people, many families that have been affected by this section of the immigration law, and they have been undergoing for a lot of frustrations, a lot of stress, undue stress for a long time. So Section 34.1 of the immigration law is something that is at odds with the Chapter of Rights. They are really affecting many lives. My family is one of those. And we are just sending us a message. My son has been very precise on saying, silence is not an option. People need to realize that whenever the rights of many are violated, people need to think over and see, there's something wrong about this and something needs to be done.
Now this stems back to your youth involvement with the FMLN in El Salvador?
You want to get back to that?
Right, the history of El Salvador.
Well, El Salvador went through a civil war. a civil war that cost more than 80,000 people. In 1980s, Archbishop Romero, he was somebody who spoke on behalf of a lot of Salvadorans, all of the Salvadorans, and he was assassinated by death squads, which in El Salvador many people can relate that there was a lot of repression, a lot of injustice, and within the context of the civil war, something needed to be done, and FMLN it was like a force that came in order to fight for the rights of the people. On the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, there is a section that it says that talks about the rights of the people to rebel against repression. And certainly El Salvador was at one stage when people cannot handle that anymore, and they needed to rebel in different ways. So I think that the allegations on Section 34.1, they are the Canadian government is clearly saying that FMLN is a terrorist organization. When they are bringing up these kind of allegations, and there are many cases within the judicial system where the Canadian government is stating that FMLN is a terrorist organization. They need to come and say that I'm not telling the truth, because this is there are many cases in this situation, like where they are doing that.
Well, the FMLN is now the elected government in El Salvador, so I know they may have opposed the forces back then, the forces that were supported by the United States during the Civil War, and they opposed that. And now, is it because the U.S. has deemed them a terrorist organization that Canada falls in line and also does the same?
Well, you tell me one thing. Barack Obama just visited El Salvador a couple of weeks ago. Right. Does that mean that they are deeming FMLN a terrorist organization? Canada has diplomatic relations with the Salvadoran government. They are the democratically elected government. So there's a big contradiction that this case shows. What people need to know and what need to understand, the Canadian government as well as the Salvadoran government, they are divided in different instances: the executive, the judiciary, and the legislative. In this particular case, we have that the judiciary is presenting these allegations against members of FMLN, and what people don't understand, who's bringing up these allegations? It's the Minister of Public Safety that brings people into admissibility hearings. If you apply a little bit of logic, wouldn't you say that it's the Canadian government that is supporting those allegations that the judiciary say? In one part of the immigration rules that are given to CBSA officers, Section 34.1 says, a foreign national is inadmissible into Canada for security reasons, for being A, B, C, D, E, F. In F, it says for being a member of an organization that there are reasonable grounds to believe is or was a terrorist organization. That organization they are referring to, according to the allegations, is FMLN. In this booklet that CBSA uses, they give them a definition of reasonable grounds to believe. They tell them, if like with an example, if you pick two ordinary people, you provide them with the same evidence, the same information about something, and if these two people arrive to the same conclusion, then you certainly say that there are reasonable grounds to believe something has happened. Now, in this particular case, let's take two ordinary people. The executive, the Minister of Canada, the Prime Minister of Canada, and the judiciary both know about FMLN, don't they? Right, they have the same information, yet the executive has reached to a different conclusion than the judiciary. Therefore, you can say that there are no reasonable grounds to believe FMLN is a terrorist organization. So you apply a little bit of logic on this situation. I think that the Canadian government needs to be clear with Canadians. Is FMLN as a terrorist organization or is a democratically elected government? I agree. Every country has the right, not only the right, but the obligation to fight terrorism whichever way they could in order to protect their citizens. But in doing that, they should not be affecting the rights and or the human rights of many people.
Right, there's been many cases that have come up over the last few years. Now, it seems like it's quite the contradiction because the Canadian government, yes, is saying that, the FMLN was a terrorist organization, and but they're quite willing to work with them as the government and, in trade and diplomatic visits. Like you said, President Obama was there, and I'm sure Prime Minister Harper would visit sometime. But how does this affect other Canadians? I mean, your case is obviously emblematic of what's going on.
Well, you have to remember, and you can see on the news and in every community, there are FMLN members here in Canada who are Canadian citizens. So if these allegations are true, then that means that whatever the Canadian government is doing with these allegations, that means that every member of a Salvadoran that are related or are members of FMLN, the diplomatic representation should be inadmissible into Canada, wouldn't it? So, during these proceedings, we presented this argument, and the adjudicator on this case, he asked this specific question. Mr. Figueroa stated that there are over 2 million members of FMLN or more that are supporting of FMLN.
Here in Canada?
No, in El Salvador. But here in Canada, there's the diaspora is 150,000 Salvadorans.
Right.
So
it's not too large.
There's a lot of Salvadorans in this case, and many of them are members of FMLN, or they are...
Or they supported them during the Civil War.
The Civil War, exactly. Canada would need to define this situation concerning the law itself. And I think that's the best way to do it. See, revising the law, because the law itself, it doesn't fit the reality. And the reality is that any Salvadoran cannot be considered as a terrorist. I would like to point out something else about this, is that, we presented during the proceedings of evidence with respect with the Commission on Truth. The Commission on Truth in El Salvador was a work done by the United Nations trying to investigate all the atrocities that were committed during the Civil War. And in that, there's some percentages that are presented concerning the Civil War itself. It says that 85% of the atrocities that were committed during the Civil War were committed by the Salvadoran government at that time. 10% they quite didn't know, but they were possibly attributed to the death squads, and now everybody knows that the death squads were heavily linked to the Salvadoran government, and 5% of the atrocities were committed by FMLN. So if you bring all those things together, the Canadian government is saying that because of that 5%, they are tagging FMLN as a terrorist. Right. How about the 95% about the Salvadorans government at that time? If you go on this, Pastor Carl Keller here was my legal representation, even though he's not a lawyer. He presented this, So that means that the Salvadoran government at that time was 17 times more terrorist than FMLN. Well, no terrorist government, no terrorist organization. As simple as that. And we need to point out another thing. The Civil War in El Salvador, the death squads and and the people that were responsible for the death of Archbishop Romero, they were supported by the United States government. In the Canadian legislation, they have this concept about harboring terrorism. So if they would apply the Canadian legislation on this, they would have to find that United States government itself would be a terrorist organization, wouldn't it? They were supporting a death squad in El Salvador.
Right. And the U.S. also supported the Contras in Nicaragua against the Sandinistas, Pinochet's regime in Chile. So this is a common theme from the U.S. is to support the repressive regimes and then come out saying that their opposition were, nowadays labeling them terrorist organizations like Canada has.
Well, it's a huge problem right now. The concept of terrorism is some nobody has a. You cannot say for certainty that Canada has a definition of terrorism that everybody in the world accepts. In this case particularly, we have over 7 million Salvadorans that do not agree with the same definition of terrorism. Back in the 80s, I made a moral decision to support FMLN. I was member of a student organization, and looking at what was happening in El Salvador, there was no options in there. Either you supported FMLN or you supported the government of El Salvador. And as a student in El Salvador, and somebody who will be just looking for standing up for the rights of the people, do you think that I will be standing up to support a Salvadoran government that was responsible for more than 80,000 people death in El Salvador? The only option for many Salvadorans that were organized in many students, workers, peasants, organizations, they supported FMLN, and I think they still do.
They definitely do. That's why they've become the democratically elected government in the country.
The Canadian government is not deporting me for I am a bad person or I am a criminal. They are. It's very clear on the decision. They are deporting me just because I was a member of FMLN and because the Canadian judicial system finds that FMLN fits into this definition of terrorism. And actually, the FMLN, that's what the Canadian government does. But as a matter of fact, they have been forcing FMLN into fitting on this definition. Just a brief description of this situation. The minister representative in this case, she presented 56 pages of the Commission on Truth report. Those 56 pages, they were just concerned about what the Truth report says about FMLN. In order for somebody to be objective on something, you need to see the whole picture. You need to see the whole Salvadoran history as the different aspects that are going in there. So in order to be objective, so rather than presenting just parts of the Truth Commission, we presented the whole document. The Truth Commission in El Salvador has many elements that people around the world needs to study. For instance, in page 10 of that on that Truth report, phenomenology of the violence is a very complicated word, but they gave a concept about criminology. It states that it is whenever there are criminal acts that are being done, it is individuals that are responsible for those, that should be punished for those, not the institutions that they created. But there are some times when the institutions themselves, they internalized and they kind of establish certain patterns and they tolerate criminal acts being done by individuals. Certainly some institutions can commit crimes. We presented this section of the Truth Commission on this because it represents something very important that can actually be applied to today. In the context that the Truth Commission presents this, they were talking about the impunity of the armed forces in El Salvador, and with that they were trying to protect the institution itself. So it is individuals that should be punished of any criminal acts. And for many Salvadorans, FMLN never had this situation that they were tolerating this kind of situation. I think my understanding is that this was a civil war, and every Salvadoran was trying to get peace in El Salvador. In 1992, that peace agreement was signed. And the Canadian government, as many other governments, they supported that peace agreement. And when the Canadian government brings this kind of allegations, it's like they are turning their backs into a peace agreement that they supported.
Right.
So there are so many things in here that needs to be talked and...
That needs to be clarified.
It needs to be clarified. But I think that the only way that it can be done is by speaking the truth about all of these situations, and to be open with people.
Which you yourself have been. As you've been traveling across the country, you've been educating many Canadians, basically almost from coast to coast. I mean, you started in British Columbia back in mid-March, and now you're here in Montreal. And you will be heading back to Ottawa. I mean, how has it been so far? I mean, talking to Canadians, talking about what's happening. I mean, have they been supportive?
You know, we left Vancouver with no money. As a matter of fact, I lost my job over making this trip. This is a situation where we came with no money, just with the hope that Canadians will listen and would help us. We started on the 18th, and we are here in Montreal now. Canadians have been helping us to move along. They haven't allowed my son or myself to be on the open, on the weather. You know, we have always had a house in Canadians' homes where we have been able to talk about this, educate people about the situation, and they have provided us with food. They have helped us move along. So that tells you that there's a lot of things that can be done. And as long as we can get to Canadians and explain the facts as they are. Canada, that's why we picked Canada, you know. Back in 1997, when we came here, we were trying to look for a place where we would be protected for the life of my life and my wife were at danger in El Salvador at that time. So we always had this concept about Canada. That Canada was a place where human rights are respected, and that's why we came all across Mexico, Guatemala, the United States, just to be on a place that we really appreciate that. That's the Canadian heritage, isn't it? Canada is made out of many immigrants. Many of those people are coming from countries where they were fighting against
oppressive regimes.
Exactly. So I think that that's what Canadians need to be proud about. After 13 years, I certainly, even though I know that they call me a foreign national, I feel more Canadian and Salvadoran as well. So
yes, and is this your first time actually going from British Columbia and traveling across the country? Because I believe you've been hitchhiking for the most part, have you not?
Yes, we have been hitchhiking. Some parts we have been getting through the Greyhound. People let me tell you a little story. We went in Kamloops. Okay, we arrived there at about midnight. Obviously, we didn't have any place where to go. And, I decided that we were going to rest at the Greyhound and wait till morning comes. So it happens that they were going to close that that depot about 3 o'clock, and they were trying to kick us out there. Wow. I said, it's cold out there, and I have no place to go. We convinced those people to allow us to be there, and we stayed there until morning came, and that's great. In Kamloops, we were talking with a couple ladies at a library there, and somebody there overheard the story that we have been telling people. And there was this lady, her name is Jennifer. She wrote to the Minister of Public Safety about this issue. The Minister of Public Safety had already, within that same week, they responded her back. But what was the minister's letter on this? It was that the Privacy Act prohibits me to talk about this issue, discuss this case, because I have not authorized him to do that. The message I want to send to everybody is, if you write to the Minister of Public Safety a letter and he responds with this kind of letter, I will gladly send you a consent form so that you can speak on behalf of my family. They want the Canadian government maybe don't want to listen to me because I'm just a foreign national, but hopefully they can listen to Canadians, and that's why we have been making this trip and talking to Canadians.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Jose.
No, thank you very much. There is so much more to be talking about this, but I think that little by little, the truth is going to be coming out on this situation, and my son has been expressing this. There's the one saying that he goes, he has been saying this in many, many occasions. Silence is not an option. When there's a situation that you need to speak up for your rights, you got to speak up, and you got to speak loud. My son is speaking very loud. He's standing up for his own rights.
He takes after his father.
Well, you do me a favor on that. I think he has developed a lot of courage in this, and he even though with his limitation about autism, he's able to see where humanity is, and that's the message that we have been sending all across Canada.
Well, good luck, and thank you.
No, thank you.